My kids are playing outside in the ice, which means I have like 10 minutes to record a video in the usual spot. In the usual spot. Again, I'll note, because I'm trying to do more of this, trying to advertise, you might say, that if you are watching this on TikTok or Reels, you are missing the full frame experience, which just really means you can see more of my bookshelf and some of the cameras up there. So check it out on YouTube, where you get more of the frame. You know, it's less cramped than it is here on TikTok. Anyway, I posted this video yesterday about what I thought was the strategic thinking of the Trump administration in Minnesota and why I think what you might call the Battle of Minnesota was a major strategic defeat for the Trump administration. And I'm recording this video to say that I'm even more convinced of this, that in fact, I've never been more confident that Immigration and Customs Enforcement is not gonna survive much longer. I don't see it here in 5 years, frankly. I've never been more confident that there's an opportunity to do a full-on dismantling of the Department of Homeland Security, which shouldn't have been created in the first place, created back in 2002, I believe. And many of the things that are happening now, people warned about at the time. As good a time as ever to say this was a mistake, this was an experiment, we gotta get rid of it. I don't know how else to put this. I'm just confident, really, that the ice, you might say, it's gonna break.
The ice is gonna break!
Why am I so confident? Well, it's a few things. The first is that Monday saw the administration really engage in not just a withdrawal, but something like a rout. Gregory Bovino, the Colonel Lockjaw-looking dude who's been running CBP operations, that's Custom and Border Protection, in Minnesota, has been withdrawn, taken out of the state, sent out to California, and they say he's gonna retire. So he's a scapegoat. And it's funny, I recommended that in yesterday's video, that if I were in their position, I would get rid of Bovino immediately. And I guess they took my advice. Probably not. It's the obvious thing to do. So Bovino is out. They're sitting in Tom Homan, who is still a ghoul and a monster responsible for the child separation policy back in the first Trump administration, but he's a little more low-key about it. Replacing Bovino with Homans is a sign that they know they messed up. You saw Carolyn Levitt say at a press conference that, of course, the president gives his condolences to the families and doesn't want to see anyone hurt.
Nobody in the White House, including President Trump, wants to see people getting hurt or killed in America's streets.
A major shift in tone from the previous weeks, and you saw Trump as well say something somewhat conciliatory.
Well, I'm looking at that whole situation. I loved everybody. I love all of our people. I love his family. And it's a very sad situation.
Again, this is all evidence that they have lost, that they are retreating. They're never going to wave a white flag, right? They're not going to openly say that we messed up and we're going to get out of there. But their actions demonstrate where their thinking is. There's also talk that there's going to be some firings. Kristi Noem has a lot of enemies in the administration, and there's a chance they may let her go. And even if they don't, House Democrats intend to introduce resolution of impeachment against Kristi Noem to get her out of there.
Kristi Noem is a despicable, corrupt, pathological liar. We've seen her slander not just one, but two American citizens, patriotic Americans who were killed without justification on the streets of Minneapolis in the last few weeks. She's deeply unqualified. She never should have been confirmed to begin with by Senate Republicans, and House Democrats have called for her to be fired immediately. And in the event that she is not terminated, we are prepared to initiate impeachment proceedings against her in the House of Representatives.
Now, I would say that this is an opportunity to further press your advantage because the architects of the immigration policies in the White House aren't just Noem, aren't just Bovino, it's Stephen Miller. And even though the likelihood that Stephen Miller resigns is quite low and he cannot be impeached, or traditionally impeachment doesn't really touch these kind of non-Senate confirmed executive officers. Miller is Deputy White House Chief of Staff, which is just a position the president can appoint without Senate confirmation. Although there is a real argument that given the amount of influence Miller wields, he is subject to impeachment. But even if you can't impeach Stephen Miller, you can still pressure him to resign. I think the next step for opponents of the administration should be to demand the resignation of Stephen Miller. Demand it. Demand it every day. Say this guy has to get out of there. This guy is the architect of the death of 2 American citizens. And he clearly wants to kill more. He's not going to stop.
Can't stop. Won't stop.
So get him out of there. Pressure the administration to get rid of this guy and make it clear that nothing will happen in terms of legislation or anything if Miller remains in the White House. This is also the opportunity to get as much as you can from the upcoming DHS funding bill. Democrats have already said they're going to filibuster it, and they're figuring out what their asks are going to be. And to be clear, Republicans do control the Senate and the House. They're not going to vote on an abolish ICE bill. Mike Johnson's not even going to bring that up for a vote in the House, and Donald Trump is certainly not going to sign it. So abolishing ICE, getting rid of DHS isn't in the cards at this moment, but you can take steps to restrict and limit ICE as best as you can, given the larger political circumstances, given the fact that Republicans still hold the House, still hold the Senate, and are still in the White House. In particular, if I were in the negotiating committee, I would insist that any DHS funding bill has to include a provision for civil liability for federal officers. I don't want to get too in the weeds here, but there's a Supreme Court case called Bivens v. 6 Unknown Named Agents, in which the Supreme Court held that even though the Fourth Amendment doesn't provide a remedy for violations of the Fourth Amendment, and in this case, the plaintiff had been subjected to an unreasonable search and seizure, the court rules that even though there isn't a cause of action, even though there isn't any statutory remedy for that Fourth Amendment violation from federal officers, the fact that the Fourth Amendment does give you this right against unreasonable search and seizures implies that there is some kind of remedy, that the courts can provide you some kind of fix for when your rights have been violated. Now, this is quite expansive, and very promptly, conservatives on the court, once they got a hold of it later in the decade and the subsequent decades, basically narrowed Bivens to the point where you can essentially only make a Bivens claim if you yourself are Bivens. It's as close to a dead letter as you can imagine. But the principle is important, and Congress could create through statute a remedy for when your rights are violated by federal officers. They could create a civil remedy in particular. That way it doesn't become an ex post facto thing, which is forbidden by the Constitution. A civil remedy would allow anyone who could prove that their rights were violated by federal immigration officers to sue CBP or ICE or DHS. That would be, in the time before it was possible to eliminate those agencies, a powerful tool for limiting them. So that would be my primary ask, a Bivens remedy for violations of rights by federal immigration officers. And I'm sure there's other things I can think of, but like I said, I don't have that much time to record this. In any case, I think it's important to recognize this moment for what it is, a victory for the opposition, and by opposition here, I mean the ordinary Americans who have been in the streets challenging ICE and CBP, a defeat for the administration, and an opportunity for Democrats in particular to press an advantage, to weaken Trump even further on what was a signature issue, immigration, and to demonstrate to the public that if you support them, they will do something to help fight this authoritarian behavior in the White House. I'm not holding my breath, of course, but I've been in this business long enough to know that one thing politicians are quite good at is following where the wind is blowing, and the wind is blowing very hard against Donald Trump.